Shalom, Chevre. Shalom, friends. It's good to be back and to be studying Hebrew once again. The language in which God has written the Old Testament has left His Word for us so that we're able to delve deeply into it and to look at all of the riches that God has left for us to study, to know His character, to know the plan that He has left for all of humanity for us so that we know how to live. And we continue learning step by step the things that we have learned, and we'll continue building on it so that we're able to read the Old Testament text from cover to cover. Now, you know that we have learned the alphabet, we have learned the vowels, and today we're going to continue learning some of the fundamentals so that we're able to take this text and so that we are able to read it. Now, as we were learning the vowels, and as we were learning the consonants, there were a few things that I referred to that I said, we're going to come back to them later. And I think at this point, we're ready to come back to some of them. When we were taking a look at the consonants, I said that there were dots in some of the consonants. And I said that there's a difference in the way that it makes the letter sound. It makes the letter harder. So for example, the letter bet, right? If you put a dot into it, it makes the sound ba. But if you take the dot out, it makes the sound va. Well, I want to take a look at those dots right now with you, and I want to see exactly what do they do, what kind of dots are there. And so this is the first thing that we want to take a look at, what we call the diggesh. The dot itself is called the diggesh. And as we look at this dot, at this diggesh, let's take a look at Genesis 1:1, the passage that we've already recited a number of times, and let's see where it appears, and then we'll take a look at the specific ways to identify this dot, this diggesh, and see what do we do with it. So in Genesis 1:1, we see Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And as we look at this text, we see that there's dots appearing even in the very first verse of the Bible. You look at the first word, Bereshit, in the beginning. The first consonant, bet, has the dot. It has the diggesh. You look at the next word, bara. The bet has the diggesh. And if you keep reading the text further, you even have a sheen later on. It has the diggesh. So what do we do with these dots? What do we do with this diggesh? That's what we want to take a look at now. When we look at these diggeshes, we see that there are two types. There is the weak diggesh and there is the strong diggesh. And we want to start by looking at the weak diggesh first. When we look at the weak diggesh, the first thing we want to ask is, what is it? Well, it is a dot, just like we've said in the past. And in this case, it's a dot that appears in the letters bet, gimel, dalet, kaf, pei, and tav. And one of the ways to help memorize this idea has been to create the statement beged kefet. It's an invention. It means that the clothing beged is bound kefet. Right? It's just something to help us memorize this type of the dot. Then the next question is, well, what does it do? It hardens the sound of the letter. And so that's why we make a distinction between ba and va, depending on when the dot is there. And here you have all of these consonants in which this dot appears, and some of the consonants in which today it makes the difference. So if you start at the very right, you see the bet there, and you see that in the case that the diggesh, the dot appears, it's ba. Where it doesn't appear, it's va. When we looked at the consonant gimel, we saw that it's the same. Whether the dot appears or it doesn't appear, the sound is going to be the same today because the distinction has disappeared by now. You look at the dalet, historically it was da with the dot and the, something like a the without the dot. But by now this distinction also has disappeared. Then you have the letter kaf. With the dot, it's ka. Without the dot, it's the spirant or the breathing sound cha. Then you get to the consonant pei, and with the diggesh, it's going to be pa. Without the diggesh, it's going to be fa. And finally, we get to the letter tav, and with the diggesh, it's going to be ta. And without the diggesh, historically, it was tha, but you go to Israel today, it's always going to be ta. So with respect to the tav, the distinction has pretty much disappeared by now as well. Now keep in mind that this diggesh also appears in the final consonants. You remember the final consonants? Those are the consonants that appear at the end of the word, and because they appear at the end of the word, they change slightly. So here, you can see on the screen, we have the final letter kaf. And the kaf at the end of the word can take the diggesh. And when it does, it's ka. When it does not take the diggesh, it's going to be cha. And the same thing with the consonant pei. If it appears at the end, it can be pa. But without the diggesh, it's going to be fa. Now, another question I want to ask about this is, where specifically does it appear, and are there any kind of qualifications to this? And as I said, that it appears specifically in the letters beged, kefet, bed, gimel, dalet, kaf, pei, tav, at the beginning of the syllable. And that's one of the qualifications. It is that it always appears at the beginning of the syllable. If this consonant is not at the beginning of the syllable, it's not going to have the diggesh. If it is at the beginning of the syllable, it is going to have this diggesh. So the final question is where it appears, and are there any stipulations that come with these consonants and with this diggesh in these consonants? And as I said before, it appears specifically in the consonants beged, kef, bet, gimel, dalet, kaf, pei, taf. And here's the stipulation. It appears at the beginning of the syllable. If it's at the beginning of the syllable, it will take a diggesh and it will be the harder sound. If it is not at the beginning of the syllable, it's not going to take a diggesh. Now, there is one qualification. It appears in these consonants unless it's after a vowel. And I have this in the parentheses, as you can see on the screen. Now, just as a example, as a number of examples, where do we see this appearing? As I said, at the beginning of the syllable. If there's a word and it's the beginning of a sentence and it has one of the consonants, beged, kefet, you can expect that at the beginning of the word, which is the beginning of the syllable, it's going to have the diggesh, like this example, bara. In the bet, there's a diggesh because it's the beginning of the word. Or it can be in the middle of a word. You have the dalet there in the middle of the word, yav, del. The letter dalet has the diggesh because even in the middle of the word, it's at the beginning of the syllable, and so it takes the diggesh. Now, what about this idea of unless it's after a vowel? We'll take a look at this example. Vavohu. The letter bet appears in the middle of a word, and it seems to begin a syllable. However, if you take a look to the vowel right before the bet, you see that there is a vowel present there, the kamatz. Well, because there is a vowel present there, we don't put the diggesh in the letter bet. And so the bet remains without the diggesh. Okay, so you look at this, and here's just a synopsis of the weak diggesh. What it is, what does it do, where does it appear? This is the weak diggesh, but there's also the strong diggesh, right? And so the question is, what does the strong diggesh do? How does it function? And this is something that we want to take a look at now. What is the strong diggesh? Well, it's a dot. Just like the weak diggesh, the strong diggesh is a dot, and it appears in all of the consonants except in the gutturals. In the gutturals, what are the gutturals? We haven't talked about the gutturals yet. We'll talk about them in just a minute. But it's the letters Aleph, Ain, Hey, Het, and sometimes Resh. So whenever a dot or a diggesh appears in any of the consonants of the alphabet, and it's not a weak diggesh, it's going to be a strong diggesh. Now the question is, what does it do? Well, if it appears in those letters that can be hard or can be soft, then it will harden those letters. And the key thing is that it doubles the letter every single time. So let me just give a couple of examples of what that means, that it doubles the letter. You have the word shiber right here, right? And you look at the middle consonant, there's a bet there. Well, what does it do? It hardens the bet, but it also doubles the bet. I put the doubling bet in the parentheses because we're not going to see it like this in the text. We're going to just know that the bet is doubled. But when we see it in the text, it's going to look like this. There's going to be a bet, there's going to be a diggesh in there, and we have to understand that this is a strong diggesh, and we'll know that the letter is doubled because it's a strong diggesh. Or you take the example Isha. Isha means woman. You see a diggesh in the letter Shin. This is a strong diggesh. And what it means is that the Shin is doubled. I put it in parentheses because that's what it means, but we're not going to see it like this in the text. However, what happens? Sometimes when the text is read very, very properly, the letter will be read a little bit longer. So instead of saying Isha, it'll be Isha. The Shin will be slightly longer. Well, following this, the question is, where does this appear once again, and what are the stipulations? It appears in all of the consonants except the gutturals. And again, we'll talk about the gutturals in a minute. So what are the stipulations, or what kind of contexts does this diggesh, the strong diggesh, appear in? One of the places that it appears in is whenever there is a consonant that drops. It disappears. Whenever that happens, you put a strong diggesh into the consonant next to it to know that something has disappeared. That may be a little bit confusing or puzzling, but let's take a look at this example. It's called here compensation for a dropped letter. Whenever a letter drops, you put a strong diggesh here. So you have min melech. Min melech simply means from a king. Well, if I say min melech, everything is fine, everything is clear. But if I want to say it quickly, min melech, what happens is that the noon is set close to the melech, min melech. And if I say it many times, I don't hear the noon anymore. I hear mi melech, right? It's as if the noon becomes the mem. And when the noon becomes as if the mem, you write the mem together inside the other mem. The mem essentially drops. And when this mem drops, you put the diggesh inside the mem to let us know one of the mems has dropped. Originally, it was a noon. It became a mem because you said it so fast, and you drop it, but you put a diggesh inside one of the mems that remains in order to let us know, hey, there was a letter here, it fell away, but we're going to put a strong diggesh to let us know that there used to be a letter here. Okay, we'll take a look at this as we keep reading the text further. There's another context in which this appears, and that's when I want to give a specific meaning to a word. So, if I want to say something broke, I'll say shavar, it broke. But if I want to say it shattered, it broke into many small pieces, I'm going to put a strong diggesh in the bet to make it more emphatic. And so I have here shavar, it broke, and then shiber, it shattered. Right? And so this diggesh in the bet is the strong diggesh letting us know that the meaning has changed. There is a doubled bet here. And because of this, I know that it's a strong diggesh, helping me to understand the proper meaning of the word shatter. So these are the dots that appear in some of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet, the weak diggesh and the strong diggesh. Now I know that a question that comes up at this point may be, well, strong diggesh, weak diggesh, there's two of them, they look the same. How do I know which one's which? How do I identify them and make the distinction? So for example, you see the word diber, you see that the dalet has a diggesh. Which one is it? And then the bet has a diggesh. Which one is it? Let me give just 2 tips. And these tips will help us identify which diggesh we're seeing in front of us. If you see a diggesh and you look before that word and there's no vowel, a diggesh after a non-vowel, it's going to be a weak diggesh. And the logic behind this is that it's the beginning of a syllable. So you take this word, for example, diber, which means he spoke, by the way. And we're going to look at the letter dalet. We see a diggesh. And you look to the word before this. Is there a vowel here? Now, in this case, we don't see a word. So let's just say this is the beginning of a sentence. There is no vowel here. It's the beginning of a syllable. So we're going to conclude this is a weak diggesh. Now, if I'm looking at a diggesh and I look to the vowel before it and I see that there is a vowel before it, then I'm going to conclude that it's a strong diggesh. So again, taking a look at this word and looking at the second consonant, the consonant bet, I see a diggesh inside the bet. And so I look to the vowel before it. Is there a vowel? There is a vowel. Because there is a vowel, I know that this is a strong diggesh, which means that it's a doubling diggesh. And so it affects the meaning of the word. Diber, he spoke. So let's take a look at the passage that we've been looking at from time to time. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Do we see any diggeshes here? And of course we do. So let's identify them. Which diggesh is the first diggesh? In the first letter bet, Bereshit. Well, you take a look at the letter or the space before it. Is there a vowel before it? You look, there's nothing here. In the Bible, there's nothing there. It's the beginning of a syllable. Well, if it's the beginning of a syllable, if there's no vowel before it, you know that this is going to be a weak diggesh. Then we carry on and we look at the next diggesh. Bara, Bereshit, bara. In the beginning, God created. We have the letter bet. We see a diggesh inside it. We look to the vowel before it. Is there a vowel here? There is no vowel here. So we know that this is the beginning of a syllable. And we conclude that this is a weak diggesh because there's no vowel before it. Let's take a look at the next diggesh. In the letter Shin, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim. In the beginning, God created the heavens. The Shin has a diggesh inside it. So now we look to the vowel before it. Is there a vowel? Of course, there is a vowel here. What do we conclude? That this is a strong diggesh because there is a vowel before it. In the beginning, God created et ha-shamayim. God created the heavens. And so you know that because there's a vowel that it is a strong diggesh. Now, as we were talking at the beginning, I mentioned that there were gutturals. And I said we're going to come back to them in a minute. And that's what I want to do right now. Come back to these gutturals and see what are they and what do they do. Well, the gutturals, as I said, are the letters Aleph, Hey, Het, and Ayin, and Resh. Why do I say and Resh? Because sometimes the Resh is a guttural, Sometimes the resh is not a guttural. But that's okay. For now, we just look at these letters and we say, okay, these letters are gutturals and the resh is sometimes a guttural. Now you will see that these gutturals are divided into two categories. There are the weak gutturals, the aleph, ayin, and sometimes resh. And then there are the strong gutturals, hey and het. What does that mean? Again, we'll see this later on as we read the text, but it simply means how the vowels are attached to the words, depending on which type of guttural we see, strong or weak, will affect the type of vowel that will go with that word. Now, what about these gutturals do we need to know for reading the Hebrew text? There are three characteristics that characterize, that define, that help us understand what these gutturals do. First of all, these gutturals reject the diggesh, specifically the doubling diggesh, the strong diggesh. So if you take a look at the word ha-Elohim, and this word should be already familiar to us, ha-Elohim, God, right? And if you put the vowels, and if you put the diggeshes, and if you put all of the elements that go to this word, there should be a diggesh inside the aleph. However, we know that the gutturals refuse the diggesh, and the aleph is a guttural, and so this word is going to refuse this diggesh. So when we see this word in the Bible, we're not going to see the diggesh in the aleph. We'll see it like this, ha-Elohim, with the vowels, but without the diggesh. So that's the first characteristic. It refuses the doubling diggesh. The second characteristic is that gutturals prefer A-class vowels. In other words, they prefer the sound ah. They want their words to have the sound ah instead of something else that they were supposed to have. So take an example, the word Shema. What is Shema? Well, you remember, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. That's the Shema. Right? So you take a look at the word Shema with which that statement begins, Shema Yisrael, and you see that at the end of the word Shema, you have the ayin, and this ayin is a guttural. So what happens? Well, it attracts the sound ah. Technically, it's supposed to be Shmo if it didn't have the guttural. However, it does have the guttural, so it's going to prefer the sound ah, and so we're going to hear and we're going to see Shema. And it takes the vowel patach here instead of the vowel olam, because this is a guttural and because it prefers the A-class vowel. And finally, the gutturals prefer the compound shva. The compound shva. What is the compound shva? What is the shva? We haven't learned the shva, let alone compound shva. Well, we're going to learn that in the next lesson. So we'll leave it for now and we'll come back to this soon. But let's take a look at the passage that we've been reciting. And let's see, do we see any gutturals here? Bereshit bara Elohim. Right? Do we see any alephs or ayins or heys, etc. in this verse? Well, as you look at it, you see that there are gutturals. And here they are. Bereshit has the aleph. Bara has the aleph. Elohim has the aleph and the hey. Then we go to et, has the aleph. Hashamayim has the hey. Ve-et has the aleph. Ha-aretz has the hey, has the aleph, and it has the resh. And I put it in the color white because it is sometimes a guttural and sometimes not a guttural. So as you read the Hebrew text, you will see these gutturals everywhere, all over the place, because they're a major part of the Hebrew language. And when you recognize them, you will see that sometimes the vowels, they look a little bit different with the gutturals, but that's okay. because you're going to know the characteristics and you're going to understand exactly why what you see is happening with the vowels in the biblical text. And so you'll be able to explain them and you'll understand the Hebrew words that are before you because you'll know the gutturals and because you'll know the characteristics of the gutturals. Sof hadavar, the end of the matter. We'll come back and we'll continue to move forward as well as to review things that we have learned so that we're able to read the Hebrew text from cover to cover.